The first time I let my son-in-law speak to me like I was hired help, I told myself I'd misheard him. The last time I was lying on the concrete floor of my own garage in January with my hip snapped in two, listening to his car back down the driveway, and there was no mishearing anything anymore. My name is Wendell Ashcroft. I'm 67 years old. I spent 40 years building a self-storage and small warehouse business across 3 counties in Ohio, starting with one ugly cinder block building off Route 9 and ending with 41 locations and a name that meant something to every bank in the region. I buried my wife, Maureen, 4 years ago, and this is a story of how my only daughter and the man she married tried to put me in the ground, and how one phone call from that cold garage floor turned them into the most thorough cautionary tale this town has ever seen. Let me tell you where I'm sitting as I say all this. I'm at the kitchen table in the house Maureen and I bought in 1987, with a cup of coffee going cold in front of me. And for the first time in 2 years, the house is quiet in a way that feels like mine again. If you've ever given everything to someone who decided your love was a weakness to be exploited, stay with me. And if you believe that being someone's father doesn't obligate you to be their doormat, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments what state you're watching from. I read every one of them. It started the way these things always start, with money. My daughter is named Sloan. She was 31 that winter. When she was a little girl, she used to ride on my shoulders through the lumber aisle of the first hardware store I ever opened. And I would have walked into traffic for her. I want you to hold on to that. Because by the end of this, you're going to wonder how a man could do what I did. And the answer is that I loved her more than my own life, right up until the night she taught me what she actually was. 2 years before the garage, Sloan and her husband Trent asked to move in with me. Just for a little while, they said. Trent had a dealership, Apex Motor Cars, out on the commercial strip, luxury used cars, the kind of place with balloons on the weekend and a coffee machine in the showroom. He told everyone it was booming. The truth, which I'd learned in pieces, was that it was bleeding cash. And the only reason its doors stayed open was a floor plan loan that I quietly guaranteed through a holding company nobody knew I controlled. We'll get to that. For now, just understand that they showed up at my door with 3 carloads of belongings and a story about consolidating while they scaled up. And I, a lonely widower rattling around in a 4-bedroom house, said yes before they'd even finished asking. I gave them the big bedroom upstairs. I moved my own things into the small room at the end of the hall, the one Maureen used to call the sewing room. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was good to have the house full again. I paid the property taxes, the utilities, the insurance. I bought the groceries. When Trent's truck needed brakes, I paid for the brakes. When Sloan wanted to redo the kitchen because the cabinets were dated, I wrote the check and pretended I didn't love those cabinets. I want to be honest with you, because I've had a lot of time to think about it. I knew. Some part of me knew long before the garage. I knew when Sloan stopped saying thank you. I knew when Trent started leaving his shoes in the front hall and looking right through me when I asked him to move them. I knew when I'd come down for breakfast and they'd go quiet, the way people go quiet when the person they've been talking about walks in. I knew, and I made excuses because the alternative was admitting that the daughter I carried through the lumber aisle had grown into a stranger who saw me as a checkbook with a pulse. The fights started small. Then they stopped being small. It came to a head on a Friday in January. There was an ice storm rolling in that night, the kind where the freezing rain coats everything in glass and the power lines come down. I'd been out in the garage all afternoon, trying to get my old snowblower running before the storm hit. I'm not as steady on my feet as I once was. I had a knee replaced 2 years back, and I walk with a little hitch. Sloan came out through the door from the kitchen with a folder in her hand and that flat, cold look I'd been seeing more and more. She didn't say hello. She put the folder on the workbench and told me to read it. It was a deed transfer. She wanted me to sign my house, the house I'd paid off in 1999, the house her mother died in, over to her and Trent. She said it like she was doing me a favor. She said I was getting older, that the stairs were a hazard with my knee, that it made more estate sense for the property to be in their names, And then she slid a second brochure across the bench, glossy and cheap, for a place called Maple Hollow, a county-subsidized assisted living facility 2 towns over. The kind of place you put someone when you want them out of sight, and you don't want to pay for anything nicer. I looked at my daughter. She was wearing the coat I'd bought her for Christmas, a real wool coat that cost more than my first car. And I asked her, calm as I could manage, whether she understood that she was standing in my garage, in my house, eating my food, telling me to sign away the only thing I had left and check myself into a facility for the indigent. She didn't blink. She said it was time for me to be realistic about my situation. That word, my situation. As if I were a problem on a spreadsheet she'd been assigned to solve. Trent came out then, leaning in the doorway with a cup of the coffee I'd brewed that morning. And he had this little smirk on his face. And he said I had until Monday. Sign the deed. Move to Maple Hollow or he'd start putting my belongings on the curb himself. He said, and I'll remember the exact words until I die. He said, "You're a guest here now, old man. Guests don't get to make demands." A guest. In the house I'd built my whole life around. Something in me went very still. I set down the wrench I'd been holding. I told them both that the arrangement was over. I told them they had until Monday to be out, and that if they weren't, I'd have the sheriff do it for them. And I turned to go back into the house to call my attorney right then, because I was done. I never made it to the door. I felt her hands hit my back, both palms flat, between my shoulder blades, and a shove with everything she had. I want you to understand. I didn't trip. I didn't stumble. My daughter put her hands on me and pushed. My bad knee buckled, and my feet went out from under me on the concrete. And I came down hard, sideways, all of my weight onto my right hip, against the edge of the bottom step where the garage floor dropped down toward the door. I heard it before I felt it. A wet, grinding crack, like a green branch snapping. And then the pain arrived, white and total. And the breath went out of me so completely, I couldn't even scream. I lay there on the freezing concrete. Above me, the fluorescent shop light buzzed. I could see Sloane's boots. I could see Trent's. I reached out a hand, and I tried to ask for help, and what came out was a sound I didn't recognize as my own. Sloane took a step back, not toward me, away. She had her hand over her mouth, and I'll tell you, the look on her face wasn't horror at what she'd done. It was fear of getting caught. There's a difference, and lying on that floor, I learned to see it. Trent crouched down slow and easy, close to my face, and he said, "Maybe now you'll understand who's in charge." And then he stood up, and he said to her, to my daughter, about me, "Leave 'em. Storm's coming. Let's go." And she went. The light went off. I heard the door from the garage, the kitchen close, and then the deadbolt slide home. A minute later, I heard their car start in the driveway. Heard the garage door I keep forgetting they had a clicker for stay closed. Heard the tires crunch over the gravel in the freezing rain. And then, nothing. They left for a weekend they'd been planning for a month. A couple's resort up in the snow country, a trip I had paid for as an anniversary gift 2 months earlier. They drove off to drink wine by a fireplace and left me on a concrete floor in the dark, in an unheated garage, with a shattered hip, as the temperature dropped towards single digits and the storm came in. They expected me to be dead by the time they got back. I want to tell you what happened next inside my own head, because it's the part of this story that matters most. I didn't cry. I lay there in the dark and the cold, and I waited for the grief to come, the way it had come every night for 4 years since Maureen died. And it didn't. Instead, something else came. Something cold and clear and very old, from the part of me that had built a company out of one cinder block building, the part that had stared down banks and outlasted competitors and never once flinched. Lying on that floor, the father in me died. The man who wrote checks and made excuses and slept in the sewing room so his ungrateful child could have the master bedroom. That man bled out on the concrete. What woke up in his place did not love them anymore. What woke up was a man who had spent 40 years understanding exactly how fragile other people's empires are, because he'd been the one holding them up. Because here's what Trent never knew. Here's what Sloane never bothered to find out. Apex Motor Cars didn't run on Trent's brilliance. It ran on a floor plan credit line, the loan that lets a dealership stock its lot with cars it doesn't technically own yet. And that line wasn't from a bank. It came from a private holding company called Cedar Ridge Capital, an entity buried under enough layers of paperwork that nobody could trace who sat behind it. Trent thought Cedar Ridge was some faceless investment fund that believed in his vision. Cedar Ridge was me. It had always been me. 3 years back, when Sloan married him and begged me to help give the dealership a start, I couldn't stand to say no to her, and I couldn't stand to let Trent know the money came from his wife's father, because I knew his ego couldn't survive it. So I funded the whole thing in secret through Cedar Ridge and my attorney Hollis Mercer, a man who'd been cutting through nonsense on my behalf for 30 years, wrote the agreement, and buried on page 50-something of that agreement was a clause, a morality and conduct clause, standard language, the kind nobody reads. It said that if the principal of the dealership was credibly implicated in fraud, violence, or the abuse or endangerment of an elder, Cedar Ridge had the immediate and unilateral right to call the entire loan due, freeze the floor plan line, and repossess every vehicle securing it. Trent signed it without reading it. He was too busy looking at the number. I forced my left hand down toward my coat pocket. Every inch of movement sent a fresh wave of nausea through me, sweat freezing on my face in the cold air. It took me what felt like an hour to work my phone free. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped it twice on the concrete. I did not call 911 first. I want you to understand that, because people asked me about it. If I had called the police right then and told them what happened, here's how it would have gone. An officer responds, my daughter gets charged with assault. Trent hires a sharp attorney with the dealership's money, my money, and they both lawyer up. They'd claim it was an accident, that the old man fell, that he's confused. The prosecutor, looking at a defendant with no record and a clean-cut husband, offers a plea. A few months of probation. An anger management class. And then they're back in my house, angrier than before, and I'm the one who has to leave. No. I wanted them to believe they had won. I wanted them to come home from their resort feeling untouchable. Because untouchable people walk straight into the trap you've laid for them, smiling the whole way. I dialed Hollis Mercer's private line. It rang twice. When he answered, I told him 3 things, slow, forcing the words out around the pain. I told him I was on the floor of my garage with a broken hip. I told him Sloan had put me there, and the 2 of them had left me to freeze. And I told him to call Cedar Ridge, to call the loan, to freeze every account, repossess every car on that lot, and have the whole thing done before Monday. Hollis was quiet for a second. Then, in that flat voice of his, he asked me only one thing. And after that, I said, you call me an ambulance. Not before. I need a head start. I ended the call and let the phone fall against my chest. And lying there in the freezing dark, I felt the machinery of their destruction begin to turn. And for the first time in 2 years, I wasn't afraid. 20 minutes later, I heard sirens. The paramedics came through the side door of the garage with a battering ram when they found the deadbolt thrown, and their flashlights cut across the floor and found me. They were good, fast, careful, calling out numbers to each other while they got a board under me. A young officer came in behind them and he crouched down and asked me what happened and who locked that door, and I lied. I told him I'd been out fixing the snowblower, that the wind from the storm must have caught the door and slammed it, that the old deadbolt had a way of jolting shut, and that I'd lost my footing in the dark. I told him I was getting clumsy in my old age. I let my voice shake. I made myself small and confused and frail, and I watched him write it down. And I tasted ash in my mouth the whole time, because every word was a betrayal of the truth. But it bought me what I needed. It bought me the look on their faces I was about to earn. The pain took me under as they lifted me into the ambulance. The last thing I remember was the freezing rain on my face and the strange, calm certainty that while my daughter was lifting a glass of wine to her mouth 200 miles north, the ground was already opening up beneath her feet. I woke up in a recovery room with a titanium plate and 4 screws holding my hip together and a clarity in my mind I hadn't felt in years. It was Sunday afternoon when the detective came. Her name was Reyes, and she did not waste my time with sympathy. She pulled a chair up to my bed, opened a folder, and told me the responding officers had noted that my garage door was dead-bolted from the inside of the house. She asked me, in a flat and patient voice, how a man goes out to his garage to fix a snowblower and ends up locked out of his own kitchen with a shattered hip. She told me she'd looked at the property records. She told me my daughter and son-in-law lived at that address, and she asked me where they were. Detective Reyes knew. I could see it in her eyes. She'd seen elder abuse before, and she knew exactly what she was looking at. One honest sentence from me, and she'd have had a warrant signed before dinner. They'd have pulled Sloan out of that resort in cuffs. But I needed them home. I needed them to walk back into my house thinking they were kings, so I gave Detective Reyes the same frail, embarrassed old fool I'd given the officer. I told her the latch was faulty. I told her I'd been forgetful, that the kids were away on a trip and I'd simply had a bad fall. She didn't believe a word of it. She tapped her pen against the folder, looked at me a long moment, and finally said, "Mr. Ashcroft, if there's ever anything you want to tell me, I'll be easy to find." She left her card on the tray by my bed. I kept it. I'd need it. They came on Monday morning, just as I knew they would. By Monday morning, you see, the resort had tried to charge the final bill to Trent's card, and it had declined. He'd have tried another. Declined. He'd have called the dealership and gotten no answer, because there was nobody there. The locks had been changed Sunday night, and a transport company had spent the small hours of the morning loading every car off that lot onto flatbeds. By the time Sloan and Trent were speeding home in a panic, Apex Motor Cars was an empty lot, with a chain across the entrance and a notice on the door. Their bank accounts, tied to the business, showed zero. Their leased cars, leased through the dealership, were being recalled. The glamorous life they'd built on my hidden money had evaporated overnight, and they had no idea why, and there was only one person left who they thought could save them. They walked into my hospital room wearing the masks. Sloan rushed to my bedside with tears already running, taking my hand, saying, "Daddy." We were so worried we came straight back. Trent hung by the door, hands in his pockets, doing his best impression of a concerned husband. And then, before I'd even spoken, Sloan reached into her bag and pulled out the deed transfer and a pen, and set them on the blanket over my legs, and told me that with everything that had happened, they really needed to get the estate in order. And wouldn't it be easier if the house were in their names so they could take care of everything while I recovered? I looked at my daughter, holding my hand and crying her crocodile tears, trying to get me to sign over my house from a hospital bed 3 days after she'd left me to die on a concrete floor. And I smiled at her. I told her, of course. I told her I understood now, that they'd been right all along, that an old man like me had no business managing all of this on his own. I asked her to hand me the pen, the relief that flooded both their faces. I'll carry that image with me to my grave, and unlike the other one, it brings me no pain at all. And then I asked Trent very mildly how things were going down at the dealership. The smile fell off his face. I asked him whether he'd had a chance to check his email over the weekend. I asked him whether the name Cedar Ridge Capital meant anything to him. I watched the color drain out of him as the pieces started moving in his head, and I let them move. I told him to sit down, and for once in his life he did what I told him. I explained it to them slowly, the way you explain something to children. I told them there was no mysterious investor. There never had been. I told Trent that every car he'd ever sold off that lot had been stocked with my money, funded through a company I'd built so that he'd never have to know his success was a gift from the father-in-law he treated like a servant. I told him I'd put a clause in the agreement he signed without reading, a clause that gave me the right to take it all back the moment he laid a hand on me, or left an old man to die in the cold. I told him that the phone call I made from that garage floor, the one I made before I called for help, wasn't to the hospital. It was to pull the lever. And by Sunday night, while they were drinking my wine and toasting their future, that future no longer existed. Sloan stopped crying. The tears just stopped, like a faucet, and underneath them was the cold, flat face I'd come to know. She started to say something about family, about how I couldn't do this to family. And I told her she was right. I told her family was exactly the word for it. I said that when she put her hands on my back and shoved me down onto that concrete, and when her husband crouched down to tell me I'd finally understand who was in charge, and when the two of them locked the door and drove off to their resort and left me to freeze, that was a decision they made about family. And the phone call I made was simply mine. Then I picked up the card Detective Reyes had left on the tray, and I dialed the number. And while my daughter and her husband sat there in that hospital room with the empty deed transfer between us, I told the detective the truth. All of it. The shove. The words. The deadbolt. The drive away into the storm. They were arrested in the hospital parking lot. There's a part of me, even now, that wishes the story ended somewhere kinder. I'm not going to pretend to you that watching my daughter put in handcuffs felt like winning. It felt like the floor of that garage. It felt like the coldest thing I have ever done, and I have done some cold things in business that I'm not proud of. But I'll tell you what got me through it, and it's the thing I want you to take away if you take away anything at all. My friend Hollis came to see me in the hospital the next day. He's 72, and he's buried 2 wives, and he doesn't say much. He sat by my bed and he told me the dealership was fully liquidated, the loan recovered, the leased cars repossessed. Sloan and Trent were out on bail using a public defender, charged with felony assault and elder endangerment, and the prosecutor, once Detective Reyes walked her through the deadbolt and the abandoned man and the timeline, had no interest in a generous plea. He told me I'd never have to worry about either of them stepping foot in my house again. And then he asked me how I was doing. Not the case. Me. And I realized I didn't have an answer, because I'd spent 2 years so busy being needed that I'd forgotten how to just be. So I started, slowly, to figure it out. I sold the big house. I couldn't sleep in it anymore, not with the garage right there off the kitchen. I bought a smaller place, across town, single story, no stairs, with a porch that gets the morning sun. My neighbor on one side is a retired plumber named Sal who fixes everything I break and never once has made me feel like a burden for asking. I had Maple Hollow's brochure framed, if you can believe it, that cheap glossy thing my daughter brought me, and I hung it in my new garage where I can see it when I'm working, as a reminder of exactly what someone thought I was worth. People ask me if I forgive her. My daughter. They ask it like forgiveness is the brave thing, the healthy thing, the thing a good man does. And maybe it is. But I've made my peace another way. I've stopped believing the lie I was raised on. The lie that says blood obligates you to bottomless sacrifice. That you owe your love to people who offer you nothing but contempt simply because you helped make them. I gave that girl everything I had, and I would have kept giving until there was nothing left of me, and she would have taken it all and stepped over my body on the way out the door. When you fund somebody's whole life, you don't buy their gratitude. You finance their contempt. I learned that on a concrete floor at 67 years old, and it cost me a hip and a daughter to learn it, and I would not unlearn it now if you offered me both back. So here's what I'd tell you, whoever you are, watching this in whatever town you're in. The most powerful thing you can do when someone who's supposed to love you decides to treat you like an obstacle is not to scream, and it's not to beg, and it's not to keep handing yourself over, hoping this time it'll be enough. It's to quietly, completely, and without apology decide that you are worth protecting, and then to act like it. I sleep through the night now. The hip aches when the weather turns, and it always will, but the house is mine, and the silence in it is the good kind. And when I sit at this table in the morning with my coffee, I don't feel like anyone's checkbook, or anyone's burden, or anyone's guest. I feel like the man who built all of it, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like that's enough. If you've ever been treated like you were disposable by the very people you sacrificed everything for, I want to hear your story. Leave it in the comments, tell me where you're watching from, and if you believe respect has to be earned, no matter whose blood is in your veins, subscribe and stay with me. There's a lot more I have to say, and I'm just getting started.